Before we begin, take just a second to subscribe if you enjoy realistic stories of betrayal, family drama, and unforgettable justice. Every story on this channel is inspired by the kinds of choices that change lives forever. Now, let's begin. The night my fiancée stood in front of my entire family and announced she was calling off our wedding, everyone turned to look at me. Not because they felt sorry for me. They were waiting to see if I would fall apart. Then my cousin wrapped his arm around her waist, smiled, and said something that made the entire room laugh. Guess she finally upgraded. That should have been the worst moment of my life. It wasn't. The worst moment came 10 minutes later, when my own uncle raised a glass, looked me straight in the eyes, and said, "Some people are born to build. Others are born to lose what they build." The room filled with awkward laughter. Nobody defended me, not one person. My name is Mason Carter. I'm 36 years old, and I live just outside Asheville, North Carolina. Until that night, I believed the people sitting around that room were my family. Looking back now, they were just people who shared my last name. For the last 11 years, I had managed Carter Hospitality, the business my grandfather built after returning home from Vietnam with almost nothing. He started with a roadside diner that served homemade biscuits before sunrise and barbecue until closing. Over 4 decades, that single diner became 3 restaurants, 2 event venues, and a catering company known throughout Western North Carolina. My father taught me everything he knew: how to negotiate without raising your voice, how to treat employees with respect, how to read a contract twice before signing it once. My uncle learned different lessons. He believed appearances mattered more than effort. His son Noah inherited that same attitude. Growing up, Noah never fixed problems. He simply found someone else to carry the consequences. Most of the time, that someone was me. When I met Emily 6 years earlier, I thought life had finally rewarded me for always doing the right thing. She taught music at an elementary school, volunteered at community events, and somehow made every room feel lighter just by walking into it. We met during a charity fundraiser at one of our venues. She laughed at one of my terrible jokes, asked thoughtful questions instead of talking about herself, and by the end of the evening, I found myself hoping she'd agree to dinner. She did. Our relationship never felt rushed. It felt steady, comfortable, real. 2 years later, I proposed during a weekend in Charleston. She cried before saying yes, hugged me so tightly I could barely breathe, and spent the drive home talking about the family we'd build together. At least, that's what I believed we were building. About 9 months before the wedding, Noah suddenly became interested in helping with the family business. That surprised everyone, because he'd spent most of his adult life bouncing between commission jobs, always chasing quick money instead of long-term success. 1 month, he sold luxury boats. The next month, imported kitchens. Then, high-end real estate. Nothing ever lasted because he grew bored the moment hard work replaced easy charm. My uncle insisted Noah had finally matured and convinced the family to give him a management position, overseeing vendor relationships. I didn't argue. I figured everyone deserved another chance. Looking back, that was probably my biggest mistake. The changes around Emily started quietly. She smiled less when she came home. Her phone was suddenly always face down on the kitchen counter. She began volunteering to handle wedding appointments alone, telling me I was too busy running the company. Every explanation sounded reasonable by itself. Together, they felt wrong. Then came the late-night text messages. Whenever her phone buzzed after 10, she'd glance at the screen, lock it immediately, and say it was another teacher asking about lesson plans. I wanted to believe her because trusting the person you love feels easier than imagining they're lying. One Thursday afternoon, I was reviewing quarterly financial reports when our accounting manager walked into my office carrying a folder. Someone had attempted to approve an $82,000 consulting payment using my digital authorization. The signature looked almost identical to mine, but not close enough. We froze the transfer and quietly checked system access logs. Only 4 executives had permission to approve payments of that size: me, my father, my uncle, and Noah, who had been given temporary authorization less than a month earlier. My father looked at me across the conference table and said something I'll never forget. "Don't accuse anyone until you know exactly who benefits." At the time, I thought we were dealing with attempted fraud inside the company. I had no idea my personal life and business life were about to collide. A week later, Emily suggested something completely out of character. She asked if I'd ever considered selling my share of Carter Hospitality after the wedding and moving somewhere warmer. Florida, maybe Arizona. She said life was too short to spend every weekend dealing with restaurant emergencies. I stared at her because only a year earlier, she'd insisted she wanted our future children growing up close to my parents. Suddenly, she wanted to leave everything behind. I smiled, changed the subject, and quietly remembered every word she said. 3 days later, I forgot my laptop charger at home and drove back during the middle of the morning. Emily was supposed to be teaching. Her car was in the driveway. That immediately caught my attention. I parked without making any noise and walked toward the front door. Before I reached it, I heard laughter coming from inside the house. A man's voice. Familiar, but I couldn't place it through the closed windows. A few seconds later, the back door opened. I stepped around the side of the house just in time to see a black pickup pulling away from the alley behind our property. I only caught a glimpse of the driver wearing sunglasses and a baseball cap. When I walked inside, Emily was standing in the kitchen holding 2 coffee mugs. "I thought you were at school," I said. She froze for the briefest moment before smiling. "Teacher workday," she answered. I nodded, picked up my charger, kissed her forehead, and drove back toward the office. Halfway there, something hit me. The district calendar. Teacher workdays were scheduled for the following Monday, not Thursday. That night I didn't confront her. Instead, I started paying attention. I checked our home security logs. The back gate had opened at 8:07 that morning. I checked our family phone plan. Emily and Noah had exchanged hundreds of calls over the previous 2 months. Most happened while I was managing dinner service or visiting another property. The timing wasn't random, it was coordinated. Even then I searched for another explanation. Wedding planning, family business discussions, anything except the obvious. Finally, I hired a private investigator. Not because I wanted revenge, because I wanted certainty. He asked me for 2 weeks. I gave him 3. Those 21 days felt longer than the previous 6 years combined. Every smile from Emily felt rehearsed. Every family dinner felt like a performance. Every joke Noah made sounded different now. Then, on a rainy Tuesday afternoon, the investigator called and asked me to meet him at a small coffee shop downtown instead of his office. The moment I sat down, he slid a thick envelope across the table without saying a word. Inside were more than 60 photographs. Emily, Noah, hotels, restaurants, weekend trips they thought nobody knew about. Pictures of them holding hands, kissing, laughing, living the life they had promised each other while pretending to love me. But the photographs weren't what made my blood run cold. Beneath them was a second folder containing copies of emails and business documents. The investigator looked me directly in the eyes before speaking. "I think the affair is the smaller problem," he said quietly. I frowned. "What do you mean?" He slowly pushed one final document toward me. "You need to read page 4. I looked down. Halfway through that page, I saw Emily's signature. Directly beneath it, Noah's. And the words printed above both names made me realize they hadn't just been planning to steal my future. They had already started trying to steal my family's business without me ever knowing it. I stared at the signatures for what felt like an hour, even though only a few seconds had passed. My own heartbeat sounded louder than the traffic outside the coffee shop. The investigator didn't interrupt me. He simply waited while I turned the pages one by one. The documents outlined the formation of a hospitality consulting company registered in Tennessee 6 months earlier. On paper, it looked harmless, a small startup offering management services to restaurants and event venues. But buried inside the operating agreement was language that made my stomach tighten. Their entire business model depended on acquiring existing regional hospitality assets through strategic transition. Carter Hospitality wasn't mentioned by name, but it didn't need to be. Every description matched our company almost perfectly. Emily owned 40%. Noah owned 60%. They weren't planning a new future together. They were planning to build it with pieces of mine. "How long?" I asked quietly. The investigator folded his hands. "Based on everything I found, at least 8 months. 8 months? That meant they had already started before we mailed our wedding invitations, before Emily hugged my mother and thanked her for helping choose the reception venue, before Noah shook my hand and told me he was proud of the man I'd become. For a moment, I closed my eyes, not because I was trying to hold back tears, because I was trying to keep my anger from making me careless. When people believe they're smarter than everyone else, my father used to tell me. They always leave fingerprints. I looked back at the investigator. Did they? He nodded once. Oh, yes. The next hour changed everything. He showed me surveillance photos from 4 different weekends, copies of hotel invoices, emails sent between Emily and Noah through a private account they believed nobody knew existed. There was even a recording of a meeting inside a downtown office building where Noah told 2 potential investors that Carter Hospitality would soon be under new leadership. One investor had asked the obvious question, "What about Mason?" Noah smiled. "He'll be too distracted by the divorce to notice what we're doing." I didn't react, not outwardly. Inside, something became incredibly clear. They weren't just betraying me, they were counting on me to fall apart. That was their entire strategy. A broken man doesn't pay attention to contracts. A heartbroken fiancé doesn't review corporate filings. They wanted my emotions to become their biggest advantage. Instead, they became mine. I thanked the investigator, paid his invoice, and drove straight to my father's house. He was in the backyard repairing an old smoker that honestly should have been replaced years earlier. He looked up, saw my face, and immediately put the wrench down. "What happened?" I handed him the envelope. He didn't say a word while reading. When he reached the final pages, he removed his glasses and stared across the yard. "I was afraid of this." I frowned. "You knew?" "I knew your uncle had been pushing Noah towards something. I didn't know it was this." He walked into the garage and came back carrying a small metal lockbox. He placed it on the workbench and unlocked it. Inside were company documents I hadn't seen before. "What is this?" "Your grandfather's final corporate amendment." I looked at him. "I've never seen it." "You weren't supposed to until the time was right." He handed me a folded document with my grandfather's signature across the bottom. Years earlier, after a disagreement with my uncle over the future of the business, my grandfather had quietly added one final protection: no ownership restructuring, no sale, no transfer of controlling assets could happen without unanimous approval from 3 people: my father, the acting managing director, and the chairman emeritus. I smiled for the first time in weeks. "The acting managing director?" Dad nodded. "That's you." I kept reading, then I stopped. "The chairman emeritus?" Dad smiled. "You thought your grandfather retired from the company." "He did. Operationally." Dad leaned back against the workbench. "But legally, he never gave up final approval authority." For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Then Dad quietly said something I'll never forget. "Your grandfather always believed businesses fail for one reason." "What reason?" "They stop protecting themselves from the people closest to them." That evening, we met with our corporate attorney, Rebecca Lawson. Rebecca had represented our company for almost 15 years. She listened without interrupting, while I laid every document across her conference table. When I finished, she organized everything into neat stacks. "The affair helps your divorce," she said. "The business documents are far more serious." "How serious?" She looked directly at me. "If Noah solicited investors using company information he wasn't authorized to share, and if Emily knowingly participated while engaged to an executive officer," she paused. "They've created problems much bigger than they realize." I leaned forward. "What do we do?" Rebecca smiled. "We don't do anything tonight." "No? No." She tapped the stack of papers. "People who think they're winning become careless. So we wait. We let them keep talking." Over the next 2 weeks, I became the best actor of my life. I smiled at family dinners. I discussed wedding flowers. I reviewed budgets with Noah. I even congratulated him when he landed what he called a major investment opportunity. Every lie he told became another piece of evidence. Every fake smile made him more confident. Every confident person eventually makes a mistake. His mistake came sooner than I expected. My uncle announced a family dinner to celebrate the company's anniversary. Almost everyone would be there: parents, aunts, uncles, cousins, longtime employees, community leaders, even several local investors. Emily seemed unusually excited. Noah looked almost relieved, like someone counting down to something. The night before the dinner, Rebecca called me. "I think tomorrow is the day." "What makes you say that?" "We received notice this afternoon." "Notice of what?" She took a slow breath. "Your uncle filed paperwork requesting an emergency board meeting." My grip tightened around the phone. Why? To vote on restructuring Carter Hospitality. I looked across my dark living room. Emily was upstairs packing for what she believed would be our wedding, tasting the following weekend. She had no idea I already knew everything. What happens tomorrow? I asked. Rebecca's voice stayed calm. I think they're finally going to show their hand. And when they do? A brief silence. Then she answered. That's when we take everything they've spent 8 months building and make it collapse in a single afternoon. The family dinner started exactly the way every Carter gathering had for as long as I could remember. My aunt complained about traffic, my cousins argued over football, and my mother insisted everyone eat before the food got cold. If a stranger had walked into the room, they would have thought they were looking at a close family. They wouldn't have seen the lies sitting quietly at the table beside them. They wouldn't have noticed Emily avoiding my eyes, or Noah checking his phone every few minutes. They definitely wouldn't have guessed that half the people in that room were about to witness the biggest mistake of their lives. After dinner, my uncle stood and tapped his glass with a fork. "I've got some exciting news," he announced. The room became quiet. He smiled toward Noah. "As everyone knows, I'm getting older. It's time for the next generation to lead this company." Several relatives nodded. My father remained silent. "I've called a special board meeting tonight. We've secured outside investors who can help Carter Hospitality expand across the Southeast. Noah will be leading that expansion." A few people clapped. Then my uncle looked directly at me. "Mason has done a fine job maintaining what previous generations built, but growth requires vision." Noah stood beside him, wearing the same confident smile he'd worn his entire life. Emily slowly walked over and stood next to Noah. Then she reached for his hand. The room exploded with whispers. My mother covered her mouth. My aunt looked completely shocked. Noah didn't care. He squeezed Emily's hand and smiled at me. "I guess there's no reason to hide it anymore." He turned toward everyone else. "Emily and I are together. We've been together for months. We didn't want to hurt Mason, but sometimes life moves people in different directions." Different directions. That was how he described 8 months of lies. My uncle cleared his throat. "We understand this may be emotional for Mason, but personal matters shouldn't interfere with business decisions." Then he slid a stack of papers across the table. "These are the restructuring documents." He looked directly at me. "Sign them." I picked up the folder, pretended to read it, closed it, then looked at Rebecca, who had quietly entered the room a few minutes earlier with my father. "I think now would be a good time," Rebecca smiled. "I agree." Everyone looked confused. She placed another folder on the table. "This is the original corporate amendment signed by Mr. Samuel Carter." My uncle's smile disappeared. Rebecca continued calmly. "The restructuring proposal filed this week is legally invalid." "What?" "It cannot proceed." "Why not?" She opened the amendment. "Because any ownership restructuring requires unanimous approval from the acting managing director." She looked at me. "Mr. Mason Carter." Then she turned another page. "And final written approval from Chairman Emeritus Samuel Carter." My uncle laughed. "Samuel passed away 4 years ago." Rebecca nodded. "Operationally." Then she produced another document. "But before his death, he established a family trust." She placed it on the table. "The trust permanently transferred Chairman Emeritus voting authority to an independent trustee selected by Mr. Carter himself." Silence. My uncle blinked. "Who?" The dining room doors opened. An older man in a navy suit walked inside. Almost every longtime employee immediately recognized him. Harold Bennett, my grandfather's attorney for over 30 years. Harold calmly adjusted his glasses. "I believe you're looking for me." Noah's face lost all color. Harold took a seat. "As trustee, I have reviewed the proposed restructuring." He gently pushed the documents back toward my uncle. "My decision is no." My uncle slammed his hand on the table. "You can't do that." "I already have." Rebecca wasn't finished. "There's something else." She connected her laptop to the television mounted on the dining room wall. The first image appeared, Emily and Noah entering a hotel. Second image, them meeting investors. Third image, copies of emails. Fourth, bank transfers. Fifth, the recording. Noah's own voice filled the room. "Mason will be too distracted by the divorce to notice what we're doing." Nobody spoke. Nobody moved. The silence became unbearable. Then Rebecca displayed the final document. Our forensic review also confirms that Mr. Noah Carter attempted to authorize fraudulent company payments totaling $82,000. She looked toward my uncle, and we have evidence that company information was shared with outside investors without authorization. Noah stood up. "This is ridiculous." Rebecca calmly handed another folder to him. "Federal investigators may disagree." He stared at the seal printed across the top. His hands started shaking. Emily looked at him. "Noah, you said nobody knew." He wouldn't answer. She grabbed his arm. "You told me everything was legal." Still nothing. Then the realization finally reached her. She hadn't just helped destroy our relationship. She had trusted a man who had been lying to everyone, including her. Within minutes, the entire room turned against them. My aunt quietly walked away. Several relatives left without saying a word. 2 investors stood up, collected their files, and immediately informed my uncle they were withdrawing from all discussions. My uncle looked 20 years older than he had an hour earlier. He stared at my father. "You knew?" Dad answered quietly. I hoped I was wrong. Emily slowly walked toward me. Tears filled her eyes. "I made the biggest mistake of my life. I believed her, not because I wanted her back, because people usually tell the truth after they've lost everything worth lying for. I'm sorry," she whispered. "I know. Can you ever forgive me?" I looked at her for several seconds, then answered honestly, "I can forgive you." Hope appeared in her eyes. "But forgiveness doesn't rebuild trust." The hope disappeared. She nodded once, then quietly walked away. That was the last conversation we ever had. The months that followed unfolded almost exactly the way Rebecca predicted. The restructuring proposal disappeared. The investors backed out. Noah resigned before the board could remove him. The consulting company he and Emily created dissolved within 6 months. The attempted wire transfer became part of a civil investigation that cost Noah nearly everything he owned in legal fees. My uncle sold his shares and retired early after realizing nobody in the family trusted him anymore. Emily moved to another state and eventually found work teaching again after a long break. I genuinely hope she found peace. As for me, I kept Carter Hospitality exactly where my grandfather wanted it, steady, honest, growing one careful decision at a time. A year later, we opened our 4th restaurant. On opening day, I hung a framed photograph of my grandfather near the entrance. Underneath it was a single sentence he used to repeat whenever life became difficult. "Protect your name. Money can always come back." These days, people sometimes ask whether I won. I don't think that's the right word. Winning would have meant none of this ever happened. What I gained wasn't victory, it was clarity. I learned that betrayal doesn't destroy your future unless you hand it the keys. Sometimes the strongest revenge isn't making someone suffer. Sometimes it's refusing to let them decide who you become. The night they tried to take my business, my future, and my dignity, they believed they were ending my story. They were wrong. They had only finished their own.